Raj, thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of our podcast. I'm a fan of your work. I have consumed a lot of your podcasts and I have read your latest book, The Stories Behind the Poses. It is on yoga asanas and their origins, which links to the Puranic folklore and tale. I was absolutely blown away by the concept because I have never known that you can, or there are historical links of asanas with the Puranic tales. You do not generally associate that. So we're going to go deep dive into that. So Dr. Raj, again, welcome on our podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the kind invitation.
Thank you. Great. So we will start this conversation first. We'll go a bit deep into it to understand the whole ecosystem of yoga asanas. Before I move on, could you please introduce yourself, some of the work that you have been doing? It would be really great for the viewers to know about the line of your work, and then eventually we're going to go deep dive into your entire ecosystem as well.
Sure. There are a few pieces to the Raj pie. I'm a scholar of Sanskrit narrative literature. My PhD work was on the Devi Mahatmya, the glories of the great goddess, part of the Markandeya Purana. My other work has been on the epics. Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana was the topic of my master's work. I've done some work on the Mahabharata. So Indian mythology or Sanskrit narrative literature, Itihasa Purana, how we want to think of that, that is my field of expertise. That is my academic training. In tandem with the academic training, I spent a great deal of time spiritually training with a master of an esoteric lineage, which I now hold. So there's a spiritual component to my work. There's an academic component to my work, and really a great deal of teaching, teaching adult learners, lifelong learners, academic teaching, spiritual teaching, hybrid teaching. I teach at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. I teach at a platform I founded called the Indian Wisdom School. I do various talks at yoga teacher training, various podcasts, and I create a great deal of online content, interviewing myself. I have a podcast at New Books Network called Indian Religions, where I interview authors on cutting edge work in the field of Indian studies broadly, Hindu studies along those lines. Yeah, some podcasting, some research, some teaching, and lots of one-on-one guidance, life guidance work. So one-on-one work with folks to help them along on their journey. And the last couple of years, I've been doing some international retreats to help solidify the teachings and the transformations in person. My students are online all over the world, and so, rather than have them all travel, I travel to a few sites and we connect in person, which is quite transformative. So that's probably far too much. You need to know about me, rajbalkaran.com, indianwisdomschool.com. Now let's get to the good stuff. What's your question?
Yeah, great. So, Dr. Raj, before we move ahead with the yoga asana ecosystem, I have a personal, I'll tell you why I'm heavily invested in this ecosystem and what happened.
So tell me.
Yeah, so originally I'm from Jaipur in Rajasthan, India. And, but I have worked in Gurgaon, Delhi, NCR when I had my own startup and everything. And before that, I have done my BTech from Bombay and in Bangalore and Infosys, all these companies I was. And then I shifted to Gurgaon because of my own startup ecosystem. I was in Gurgaon, the weather conditions, the air and everything was so bad. And I am from the northern region part of India. I was not able to handle the conditions of Gurgaon, the air, the quality, everything was really bad. Now it is even worse. And I started having a lot of, not diseases, but a lot of problems, respiratory problems, hair-related problem. It became dry. A lot of issues that started happening. And that is when I discovered, so I used to take medicines and I used to visit a lot of doctors. Nothing worked in a way that I would want them to work. Nothing. And so when I say nothing worked in a way, that means none of them was sustainable. You can't do them for a prolonged period of time. It's like keto diet. You can do it for some time, but then eventually you need to go on to the normal diet. I stumbled upon yoga asanas. And the thing that I stumbled upon is what we call predominant in India is Hatha Yoga, because there are a lot of lineages in India who are working very aggressively towards this thing. So I discovered yoga. I actually discovered yoga through Isha Foundation, which is Sadhguru's foundation, though I have no affiliation towards that foundation. I just discovered because they're very aggressive in the way they market. That's their entry point for people to further go into things. Anyways, I got interested. I started doing little by little. I used to look at YouTube videos and channels, started doing basic Surya Namaskar, started learning Bhastrika Pranayam and all these things I started doing. I actually saw great results. I mean, it was transformational. And I used to tell my roommates ki yaar, wake up with me, do some Surya Namaskar, do some pranayama. It is really brilliant. And that is when my love affair with yoga started. So the science of yoga and the origins of yoga is something that used to always fascinate me. Then I stumbled upon your book. I had no idea that these poses could be traced back, and which we're gonna explore to the Puranic tales. And in your book, you have beautifully segregated. One part is the Shiva part, wherein you have certain poses which are associated with the Shiva Puranic tales, which encompasses their children, their wife, everything, like Shiva's entire ecosystem. Then you have the Vishnu part, wherein there are certain poses which are associated with Lord Vishnu and his avatars. So it's like ecosystems. You have the ecosystem of Shiva, you have the ecosystem of Vishnu, and then you have the Devi part of it. Again, you have an ecosystem. Then you have the other gods also part. Ki there are other gods and their stories from where some poses could be derived and some poses could be inspired. And then you have the Rishis part as well. Because I've heard about Masendranath, I know about Gorakshnath. People do believe that that's how these things originated. Okay. So Dr. Raj, it's a very fascinating ecosystem. Your book is absolutely brilliant. And I think the purpose of your book that you have also mentioned is that you keep it with yourself. It can inspire you to deepen your practice once you know where the origins are. You know, for somebody who's really invested in the Hindu ecosystem, it can really help them. For somebody who's just looking for some fun trivia, they might not associate themselves with this vertical. They are just doing it for the sake of physical benefits. For them also, it is very interesting. What is yoga asanas? And when I say what is yoga asanas, let's go as deep as possible. We can start from the origins of it, of what you know is the origins of the yoga asana. Are there certain people to which we can say that yes, they were the originators of yoga asanas? And what are the type of like hatha yoga, school of yogas that we have right now? So I am going to first start with a basic fundamental question of understanding what is yoga asanas, because yoga asanas are there also in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. Yogam Sukham Asanam, like whatever is comfortable for you, you do that. Not a lot is elaborated over there, but a lot of people do trace back to Hatha Yoga and Yoga Asanas to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra as well, but I didn't find a great deal of knowledge over there. So I want to understand what is Yoga Asanas and this entire ecosystem. Let's start with that.
Yeah, so I think that's a brilliant and important question. And I think when we are approaching questions, we need to understand the nature of the terrain and the nature of our purview and the nature of our bias. And while we are educated, those of us who are educated in a Western education system, and certainly those as yours truly who have been raised in a Western milieu, in order to succeed and to think clearly, we prioritize texts. Whether we are textual scholars or anthropologists or whatever, certainly doing well in school means understanding how to extract information from a text and ideally have your own original thinking around the information you attract. And so what I'd like to begin with is the reality that Indic traditions historically did not operate such that the text was the beginning of the tradition. Such that in Abrahamic traditions, we have this idea that, okay, we have the Gospels, these are the words of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ to many, recorded by his faithful disciples. And even though they were all contemporaries, still there are differences here and there. And certainly there's a history of redaction and a history of, canonization and what should be included, what should be excised, et cetera, et cetera. But there is a civilizational bias, not necessarily a negative one. It's just that for every strength implies a weakness. Every weakness implies a strength. And so thinking linearly through text as the genesis of tradition is not commensurate with Indic religion historically. More in modern times, absolutely. We have to understand that by some profound cultural systematization, the Vedas have been faithfully kept alive. And this is not a dogmatic or a practitioner's view. This is actually a scholarly view. The Vedas have been systematically, pristinely kept alive, now for millennia, but certainly for centuries in the absence of writing, and this is unimaginable to most moderns, Indic or otherwise, that the knowledge was kept alive in the absence of writing. And so, for those of us who seek texts as Genesis or texts as evidence, we have to understand that we are compromised because we are broaching a tradition that was largely kept alive through oral transmission, even when there was a text, such as Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which consists of 194 extremely terse aphorisms. The text is a prop for the exegesis of someone in whom these truths are awakened. So in the Indic tradition, the texts are rarely the beginning of tradition. If anything, they are the culmination of tradition. For example, 15 centuries ago, we have the crafting of the Devi Mahatmya, the glories of the goddess Jagadamba. Do you think people woke up 15 centuries ago and said, hey, you know what? We have Vishnu, we have Shiva, we have Indra, we have this, we have that, we have Brahman. Hey, we need a divine mommy. Let's sacrifice a buffalo to the Holy Mother. They've probably been doing this for millennia. It's primal. They crafted a text because they needed to fold this into Brahmanic tradition, and so they gave her a Brahmanic text, the Devi Mahatmya. But the text is in many ways the crystallization of the tradition, not the genesis of the tradition. Wow. Now, we have no way of knowing what was preserved by whom and where, and there are scholars who do fine work tracing the trajectory of texts, but that work, however fine, must admit it is occurring in an ecosystem of oral transmission, where texts are not the origins of tradition, and above and beyond that, texts do not contain the tradition. I've been to hundreds and hundreds of satsangas or transmissions on the Bhagavad Gita, which blew my mind open from my own spiritual teacher, teachings which I share to this day, that are generated from what you see in the Gita, but you cannot completely understand how the Gita relates to Patanjali, relates to the Upanishads without that awakened, embodied knowledge. So we have to begin there. Having said that, certainly in terms of yoga, to my mind, there is capital Y yoga and there is small y yoga. Mm-hmm. Yoga now in English, I live in the holy city of Toronto these days in Canada, but yoga in English in the Western world and even the modern Indic world means asanas, means physical postures. Now, for those who are more spiritual or perhaps even more scholarly, we understand that yoga actually is what I think of as capital Y yoga, which is one of the 6 darshanas, philosophical schools. There are 6 philosophical schools, orthodox Hindu schools, schools that did not break away from Brahmanism, such as Buddhism and Jainism and Charvaka, schools that said, okay, let's uphold the Brahmanical priesthood, etc., and let's track these paths of waking up. So yoga is one of the 6 classical Hindu paths of spiritual awakening. And we see the term yoga used in the Bhagavad Gita. We see the term yoga certainly used in the Yoga Sutras. And ultimately, these contribute to spiritual awakening, to seeing all that can be seen, to learning all that can be learned, to the karma being burnt, the lesson being learnt, full, complete, total apex of human consciousness. This is the journey of yoga, and there are many paths up the mountain. Now, one such path includes hatha yoga, or physical postures. In Patanjali's distillation of the classical yoga school, asana is one of the 8 limbs, including, for example, pranayama, breath control, dhyana, dharana, right? It's one of the 8 limbs in Patanjali. Yeah. He's talking about capital Y yoga, but in terms of small y physical postures, there's a great deal of discourse and debate. Certainly, we have medieval texts. We have the Amrita Siddhi. We have influence from the Natha tradition. We have Goraknath and Matsyendra. We have these medieval figures and medieval texts where we see Hatha Yoga. We see influence from Shaiva and Tantra traditions. where if the practices, the physical practices were used, they were certainly used as a means of something beyond. They were not used in and of themselves. The ultimately asana is seat. Ultimately, the asanas prepare one for to be seated. To be seated for what? To be seated to pursue awakening. This is what the seat is. This is the flight you buy a ticket on when you're doing asana, the flight towards the divine. This is the asana. Now, certainly we have yogic postures as ancient as the Indus Valley civilization. If you think of the Pashupati seal, for
The seal
example,
that was discovered.
clearly, I mean, we'll never know probably uh, in a scholarly sense whether that is an unbroken tradition to Shaiva and or yoga traditions. But to my mind, to my, you know, where else does Shiva worship come from? It doesn't come from the Vedas. And so clearly there has been an ancient tradition of venerating this deity, now known as Shiva, who's always been Pashupati, surrounded by beasts, as indicated in the seal, and who's always been related to the path of waking up and being in a yogic posture for the point of waking up. Now, there are scholars such as Mark Singleton who show or at least argue that uh, the various postures that we see in modern yoga, small y yoga, are very much a product of 19th and 20th century influence in the hands of particular teachers.
Yes.
And that's all good and well. And so, what I want to say is, capital Y yoga has to do with the evolution of consciousness. Small y yoga has to do with the manipulation of the body. But the manipulation of the body, the asanas have been so insightfully designed that when you manipulate the body through the asanas, you don't just manipulate the gross physical annamaya kosha food body, the medical body, the physical body, the body that we poke and prod, the body we put stents in, the body we put chemicals in, which is very much real. The asanas activate your subtle body as well. And so you see and feel changes, whether spirituality is like gravity, whether you have a name for it or believe in it, it will have an impact on you. So there is a subtle realm. We do have a subtle body. It is something that we can verify experientially, not necessarily intellectually. When you cut open a person, you don't see nadis, you don't see chakras. That's pseudoscience. But the asanas are designed to impact the evolution of consciousness. So whether or not a person is looking for that or even believes in that, they will first and foremost feel some relief always, which is why people come back. And more often than not, they will grow. This is the nature of the asanas.
Wow. So, lot to unpack over here. So, you are saying that first of all, the Indic ecosystem is not an ecosystem which actually revolves around a central text, wherein we have the origin and source, and then we validate everything. But, Dr. Raj, one small thing I just want to ask. It's not revolving around a central text, which is good. In a broader sense, I think it's a more evolved ecosystem. But doesn't the concept of oral transmission for a civilization which is very ancient go against our validity of the things that we have discovered? Some people could say कि यार oral transmissions are something that we would rather not rely upon, in a way, as in it is even less quantifiable for ecosystem which is such complex. And specifically when you talk about schools, the darshana schools of tantra, which is basically like manipulating the matter for your own benefit and getting something out of it by involving a higher deity or a higher power. And some people might call those deities higher level of consciousness as well.
The exact opposite is true. The very dangers that you present about Tantra is exactly why it is guarded by wielders who have the wisdom to know with whom to share it.
Brilliant.
Number one. Number two, you can find your recipe for chana masala online, no problem. Do you know how your grandmother makes it and why it's so good? She'll tell only you because maybe you deserve to know a recipe like this. So lineage is holding knowledge Sure, one can make the argument there's hegemony and there's a power structure that needs to be, certainly there's a shadow of Brahmanism as there is in all class. All society is a pyramid scheme on some level. And it has a shadow that has to do with the top on the backs of the bottom, of course, obviously. But without that Brahmanical system, we would not have texts preserved. There's nowhere on earth where we have the preservation of religious texts for 4 millennia, at least. There's nowhere on earth where we have this. There's nowhere on earth where we have this. There's nowhere on earth where there's a thriving cult. I mean, cult is a religious studies term, a following of the Divine Mother. It has been wiped out except for Bharata. Why? Parampara. How have all of these systems of thought survived despite British rule, despite various foreign powers? How have they survived? Parampara. I can go to a temple an hour north of Toronto and take darshan of Devi and have a priest do a very powerful Vedic ritual. You would not know what century you're in. You would not know what continent you're on. Why? Parampara. This knowledge has been guarded by people who understand with whom it should be shared.
And that is what, okay, we'll come to that part as well, because I think this is very powerful what you have said. It is extremely powerful. There is this very famous British Indologist called James Mallinson. Now, I was aware of James Mallinson's work because, as I said, I was deep down into the origins of Hatha Yoga. I really wanted to understand what is happening. I stumbled upon his book on Hatha Yoga. I'm forgetting the title of the book. And I also stumbled upon some of his talks online in which he has actually related Tantra with Hatha Yoga. He's like, Hatha Yoga and Yoga Asanas are something which is very well associated with Tantric ecosystem, though that entire video and everything was very technical for me to understand because it's very research oriented. What I found troubling, Dr. Raj, in his entire thesis and his entire ecosystem, he actually linked the origins of Yoga Asanas, Hatha Yoga to Buddhism. I mean, there must have been some references that he must have had, some research he must have done. He's somebody who stayed in India. He was a part of a particular lineage of Aghoris as well. And yet he said, and he concluded his research of many years by saying that the oldest reference that we get of asanas are not in the Hindu text, but they are in the Buddhist text. And now people are in the West are of this belief that, okay, we knew meditation is a Buddhist thing. Now we also know that asana is a Buddhist thing. So I first want to understand these three ecosystems. Let's first go into, is there some link with yoga asanas, which is another one part of the one darshanam, which is a capital Y, and Tantra. So is there some link with the asanas and the Tantra? And if there is some link with the asanas and Tantra, do you think there is some relevance of this conclusion that Hatha Yoga could also be associated with Buddhism?
What you are referring to, this quandary, this quibble you have, pertains to an argument based on textual sources and the historicity of textual sources. There certainly is an argument to be made that James Mallinson is making, and it certainly on some level may hold water if you buy the argument. Now, to my mind, the fallacy there is not in the scholarly argument. The fallacy is in the stance that texts are the origins of tradition. That's not how Indic tradition works. There's knowledge as a member of Parampara. Any member of Parampara will tell you there is so much knowledge available that has never been written down to our knowledge. It is only passed from teacher to student. And once upon a time, the entire text, whether the Bhagavad Gita, whether the Yoga Sutras, it's in someone's body. Someone teaches you. Ata Yoga Anushasanam, Ata Yoga Anushasanam. You would memorize it. You would learn some grammar, perhaps. And then if you're adhikara, if you are in the right consciousness to receive the teachings and make the most of them, Gordon Ramsay won't train just an idiot. He'll train somebody in whom he sees tremendous potential. And Gordon Ramsay has maybe more students than the greatest gurus in the world, but he will train people where there's potential, and he will vet them for their potential. Are they adhikara to open a restaurant, to have his name on their brand or not? This is not a subtle concept. It's very simple. There are those who have the capacity to grasp subtle truths, and there are those who most certainly do not, and there is a wide spectrum in between. Now, because content was written down in the Buddhist context doesn't mean it originated there. This is a fallacy. The Puranas are the latest of the texts that we have, the Vedic traditions, Upanishadic traditions. Do we think people started waking up only 2,500 years ago? Do we think 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 years ago? Do you think in the history of the human genome, 200,000 years that modern humans have walked the earth, there weren't tinkers and seekers and spiritualists and mystics among us? Obviously, this you just need some emotional intelligence to understand. Obviously, people like myself are not surprised that there are 20,000-year-old cave art in what's now France, or that humans, were in the New World 100,000 years ago. This is not surprising to me at all. So, just because the Upanishads were crafted in Sanskrit as a response to Vedic tradition does not mean that the science, if you will, of waking up originated there. It's just because the Puranic tales emerged 3rd century CE onwards. Do you think before 3rd century CE no one was bowing to Ganapati? Do we think that people started worshiping the great goddess 5th century CE? For some 8th to 13th century CE, if you buy Yukoji's argument, whatever. The point is, the fallacy is adopting the ideology and the methodology of a textual tradition, of Abrahamic traditions, which say it begins with the covenant with Yahweh from the Hebrew Bible, which say it begins with the Gospels of the words of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, which say it begins with the prophet Muhammad and the angel Gabriel who whispered in his ear. It begins with the text. Now propagate the text. This is a cultural bias, and this does not entirely accord with the way in which knowledge was preserved and transmitted in ancient India. This is just simply a fact. And so, yes, we can make the argument that we have no other evidence than this text. But that argument, we have to understand, may well be on quicksand, because we have no idea what was preserved by whom, where, because the text was not, at best, for exegesis, you see. Patanjali was not writing a text, he was codifying centuries of tradition that was in the ether, that was in who knows whose bodies for how long. And so this notion that Hatha Yoga begins because this Buddhist text is the earliest text we can find, I understand why that might be a worthy scholarly argument. To my mind, it's missing the forest for the trees. It's penny wise and pound foolish. Vibrant ritualism and vibrant philosophy exist in both Buddhist and Hindu traditions. The fact is that yoga as a path of waking up is ancient. The fact is that asana as a limb of yoga as a path of waking up is ancient. Now, which asanas came when, we don't know. The texts don't talk about the asanas that are in modern parlance. But what we do know is many of those asanas are named after Puranic figures and mythic motifs. Why would that be?
My problem right now, what I face in India is that people, for example, and I don't know how much, if it's a fact, as I was talking to you about Tantra in today's time have become so abusive. It has become so abusive. Every person is coming on the podcast and they're saying, she came to me or he came to me, and the kind of thing they're saying, if India has to become the number one power in the world, we need Tantra. And my rational mind says, did Germany, France and UK, they needed Tantra, or the scientists were freezing the light, they needed Tantra? In today's time, the knowledge that we had in the country of origin is so abused, so neglected. People know nothing about anything.
Have you watched Harry Potter?
Yes. Okay. Yes.
My dear boy, you are trying to speak wizardry with muggles, and muggles should never know about wizardry because they will misunderstand it, they will fear it, they will abuse it. This was the purpose of parampara, to not have these teachings in the hands of those who would do themselves and others and the tradition harm. The purpose of this quality control was to protect the teachings and the wielders of the teachings. This was the very purpose. And this is why tantric teachings, even to this day, for the most part, are not public. Now, there are those who associate or conflate tantra with either good sex or black magic.
Yeah.
If you want to have good sex or group sex, call it that. If you want to do black magic, maybe call it that. This is just a teeny shadow of the tantric tradition. This is the most public because this is the most base and crude, right? The vast majority of tantrikas, they're brahmacharyas. They're not orgiastic hedonists.
Yeah.
The vast majority of tantrikas, they are of the light. They're using the Shakti not for them, but to bless other people. They're using the
That is
spiritual
very
power
important. Yeah.
for blessing.
Yeah.
Tantra has to do with the transformation of the body through
Yes.
the cultivation of Shakti.
Yes.
Shakti is a highly refined form of prana. If prana is the milk, Shakti is the ghee. It's very powerful. It's energy. It's spiritual energy. The wielding of that spiritual power, it's not moral and it's not immoral. It is amoral, just like money. Money is not the root of all evil. That's ludicrous. If
Yeah.
$1 billion came into the field of Dr. Raj, this world would be changed. Indic studies would be changed. Scholarships would be founded. The ego is the root of all evil. Money is energy. Shakti is energy. Morality is, what am I doing with it? Am I helping people or harming people?
Absolutely.
This is
Absolutely.
the morality. The cultivation of spiritual power is amoral. The Devi in the Devi Mahatmya, she is considered Bhukti Mukti Pradhayini.
Hmm.
She's not just waking you up, she's giving you enjoyment. The Shakti is amoral if it's being cultivated. If this vessel had a different maybe moral calibration with the ability to read people and influence people that is present, much damage will be done because I know right away what people's wounds are. I'm a healer. As soon as they come for one-on-one work, I sense exactly where they need to be healed. I know what their vulnerabilities are. I can sense them like this. But that power is being used to heal them, not to exploit them, subjugate, harm them. So Tantra has to do with the cultivation of spiritual power, which is part and parcel of the transformation of the body, which is holding spiritual power. Spiritual power is not a name brand of any religious tradition. Okay? Spiritual power. We can call it Shakti, we can call it spiritual power. If we are to believe the Gospels, obviously Jesus of Nazareth cultivated spiritual power. Clearly. Clearly, when people bow before the Pope and the papacy, for all of its sociocultural trappings, they are venerating the power innate in that post, Shakti of that post of the papacy, that is beyond the man sitting in the post. So, spiritual power is in various religious traditions. Perhaps it is the essence of religious traditions. Ancient India has cultivated ways to really garner Shakti. Most of those ways you see in Tantra, but the thing is, it's a tapestry. You cannot take out the Vedic strand, the Upanishadic strand, the Puranic strand, the Tantric strand. It's an ecosystem of ideas that I call the Hindu jungle. And when you're going even to the temple, this temple I tell you about, any temple, you have a Vedic priest and he's doing Agnihotra, he's doing a Homa, fire ritual.
Yeah. Ritual. Yeah.
And maybe he's doing a Homa for Durga, maybe now is Navratri. And in this Homa, what that he's doing, he's using mudras.
Hmm.
He's using mudras.
Yeah.
He's using bija mantras. These are gifts from Tantra. Why? He wants to, this word I coined, Shaktify. He wants to Shaktify the ritual. He wants to Shaktify the blessing. He wants to increase the spiritual power. So tantric technologies, quote unquote technologies, tantric thought and tantric practices now have seeped into various branches of Indic tradition. Whether you go through the Tantra door or go through the asana door, you will definitely eventually experience spiritual energy in your body. Whatever you call that, you can call that. When you are cultivating that spiritual energy, you can dispense it. If you're dispensing it for your own sake, then maybe you need some moral education. If you're dispensing it for other people's sake, maybe this is punya.
I am a very ardent follower of the teachings of Sri Aurobindo and Mother. Now, their concept is very clear. They talk about something called as integral yoga. Their integral yoga, and Sri Aurobindo's idea was that I want to reach up to the conclusions of Vedanta via Tantra or something like that. He combined. And he said, there will be a species that will come that is beyond the human species, in which the participation of a body is a must. You cannot ignore this instrument. You cannot ignore this thing. This has to evolve. This has to move on. This has to change. Certain organs have to be discarded. Certain new organs would be created because the consciousness demands. The higher it goes, the hardware also has to accommodate the software. And somewhere I obviously buy into the concept. I love the concept. And he does speak about Hatha Yoga. Very specifically that this effort was made in the past. A very arduous and a very religious effort in the form of Hatha Yoga was made to transform the body as well, to see the limits of the body as well. So Dr. Raj, what is your take on the philosophy? What do you mean by transformation of the body? What do you mean by changing the body, be it by Tantra, be it by yoga asanas? So I would want you to first tell us, is it even possible? And if it's an aim, where does then yoga asanas come into the picture, and also the broader Tantra's philosophy?
Well, Sri Aurobindo was obviously a very fascinating and highly accomplished. He was a Renaissance man. I mean, he was great at analysis, poetry, you name it. He was a freedom fighter. He was a sage. He had a wide range of activities. Astonishing, actually. He wrote probably one of the longest poems written in English. Savitri. It's brilliant. And so
took me 4 months to read it.
Yeah, there's much to be said there. My sense, if I had to think cogently about what he's talking about there, it sounds like he's talking about the process of evolution, scientific evolution.
100%.
Just as we have, we seem to think that we're static. We're not static. We are the result of millions of years of evolution. And we are continuing to evolve. We are at a state, in sort of this astronomical time, we were at a state where we're not quite sure what the appendix is for. Maybe at one point there was a use for it. Yeah. Maybe a million years ago, it would have been clear if we could examine some sort of hominid a million years ago, it would be clear what that organ was for. Now it's optional. So obviously, yes, our very bodies are changing due to the course of evolution. There's no question about that. That will necessarily be the case. What Aurobindo would add to that, above and beyond a stringently materialistic perspective, is that the process of evolution is guided by consciousness.
Yes.
Or that, consciousness has to do, insights that came to me some years ago, actually maybe decades now, is I had this thought experiment that, what is the difference between living things and non-living things? Quite simply, awareness.
Absolutely.
A living thing is aware of its surroundings. A non-living thing is not aware, that we can measure. And so if awareness is the sine qua non, the essential component of life, then the more heightened the awareness, the more heightened the experience of life.
Yes.
The more aware a human being, the greater they live, the more vividly they live. When Socrates is saying an unexamined life is not worth living, he's saying, why should we live as a rodent that has a limited awareness, or even another primate? Examine your life. As you increase your awareness, you will increase the extent to which you're alive, experience of being alive in the world. And I think this is not a far stretch to take to another level and say, what Indic thought is saying is that consciousness is the crown jewel of creation, and the ascent to consciousness is the theme of the human journey, of which all of our lives are variations. All of our lives, 8 billion people, 8 billion stories. And yet, everybody learns life lessons. Why is this? because everybody has blind spots. Okay, what happens when you illumine that blind spot and that blind spot and that blind spot? What happens when you've illumined all of the blind spots possible? Enlightenment. There's no shadow. There's no way for ignorance. There's no place for ignorance to hide. So I say, perhaps we are evolving physically on that level. What I mean by the transformation of the body is
Yeah.
that when people do asanas, whatever their beliefs are, it's irrelevant. Whatever their even their aims, they typically come because the lowest hanging fruit is I'm suffering and I want to alleviate my suffering. This is how people go out and buy things. Typically, they're in pain. Either they're seeking pleasure or they're seeking to avoid pain. The vast majority of human activities are because someone is seeking pleasure or because someone is seeking to avoid pain. And maybe they're seeking to avoid pain. They will go to a yoga class so they can feel better. They feel better. Maybe they alleviate the respiratory issues caused by the pollution, as was mentioned earlier. Perhaps they have some pain in a particular part of the body. Perhaps who knows what. But everyone who does asanas, they feel better. They feel better in a sense that's more than just physically feeling better. They either emotionally or spiritually feel better because the asanas are designed to access and manipulate not just the physical body, but the subtle layers of self. So by accessing the subtle layers of self, your body is becoming transformed in that you are more aware of what's happening inside you and more able to control your field of energy if you progress, to control your prana if you progress. You understand that, okay, I'm not just using the iPhone. Okay, I have an iPhone, it's great, wonderful little device. When I travel for retreats or conferences, I don't have a laptop. I have a wonderful setup here in my home office, and I run my life on this, not even a case on this phone. I run my life from this computer in the palm. I can use all the apps fine, but do I have an interest in knowing how the circuitry works? Do I have any awareness of how the Genius Bar operates? Do I have any awareness of how the programming operates? If I did, would that impact, would that transform my relationship to the iPhone? 100%. So with the awareness and the experiences that come, the very bodily experiences that come with asana, you are transforming your consciousness and your relationship, your awareness of your body and the layers of your body, and your very relationship to your body is being changed because of that awareness.
Wow. Now I'm going to touch upon the topic of longevity here, and I'm going to start with a story first, not a story. So you know about Patabi Joyce, who started Ashtanga. He was Krishnamachari's student along with B.K.S. Iyengar.
Indeed.
Patabi Joyce's grandson was Sharat Joyce. Now Sharat Joyce was a very famous Ashtanga teacher because Patabi Joyce, after he passed away, his grandson took over the legacy. I actually had read a book that he had written a couple of years back called Ageless. Now, that book that Sharat Joyce actually wrote, Ageless, was on the benefits of yoga asanas and how it can actually help in the longevity, because right now health span and lifespans are something that a lot of people are talking about. But then he died. Last year, he died of a cardiac attack whilst he was doing hiking. And I was shell-shocked, Dr. Raj. I was like a man who had written a book, Ageless, who had such a great legacy of doing Ashtanga asanas and yoga asanas for many years at a particular time, like a sadhana. At a very young age, he died because of a weak heart. So in my mind, when people do say, Ki Raghav, I'm going to say something in Hindi. People say, Yog karo nirog raho. With yoga, you are always without any diseases. I want to believe it. I want to believe that, but I want to know the extent of this statement.
This has to do with the integration of the spiritual and the physical. And obviously, asanas will confer benefits upon the individual, the practitioner. There's no question about that. Conferring immortality? Of course not. Now, sometimes teachings occur in parables. I think people think idealistically.
Ah, yeah.
So somehow it's interesting because very intelligent people who can think chronologically and think historically, they really struggle with spirituality often. And the flip side of that is those who are just innately spiritual, they really struggle with left brain function. They really struggle with parsing out this and this and this. Of course, it is not the case that everyone who does yoga will live a long time. That could not possibly be the case. If you are looking for more of a pragmatic, materialistic response, then this individual had a particular genetic makeup at birth and a lifestyle, and that arrow left the bow years and years ago and finally caught up with him. If you are taking that and looking for a deeper spiritual understanding, in accordance with his karma, the ayuhu, the length of life, is decided for every individual that enters the earth. According to most strands of Indic thought, the amount of time is decided, the quality of time is not. What you do with that time. So whether he took his last breath at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, the question to my mind is, did he breathe deeply between his first and last breath? Or did he breathe very shallowly, like an animal ready to pounce who is ensconced in this adrenaline? Is he living sort of fueled by adrenaline? Or when many human beings are, they're like, rodents don't take deep breaths. They're always afraid. They're caught up in fear. And when there's fear, there's shallow breathing and anxiety. And when a person breathes shallowly as a baseline, they have very high anxiety, and it creates all kinds of problems for their manas, their mental, the mental apparatus. If he's able to breathe deeply, where there's deep breathing, there's not anxiety. Where there's anxiety, there's not deep breathing, to the point that even if you are anxious, beyond anxious, if you are able to regulate your breathing, you will see a direct result on your psychology. So the question to my mind is, well, of course it's folly to say anything will, this thing, turmeric will cure COVID. Probably not. Yoga, you'll live to be 138 years old and still have a full head of hair doing yoga. That's obviously a ridiculously reductionistic way for anything to do in the world. The question is not about how long you live. The question is about your quality of life. And I would say the proof is in the pudding. You don't need to believe anybody or not believe anybody. Who cares? You can argue till the cows come home. And in India, they're always home. You argue for as long as you'd like. Yeah. But do it and see.
So, Dr. Raj, then you talked about breathing, and we have touched upon pranayama as well. Is pranayama, because pranayama, as I know, is also linked with asanas, because in the asanas, if you go to institute, we are taught to breathe in a certain way as well. Is pranayama a complete separate entity than asana, or is pranayama, which is the breath work, as we call it, the control of the breath, a part of the asana ecosystem? Because why I'm asking this, because I feel pranayama is, according to Yoga Sutra Patanjali, a separate limb. It's one of the asana pranayama. Asana and pranayama separate over there, like from the 8 points perspective. But when you're doing asanas, pranayamas are included in that, and obviously you can do pranayama separately. And when you do pranayama, then the concept of kundalini and the chakras come up, which I personally have still not digested. I haven't digested. Maybe my mind is too rational. Maybe I am too stuck up in my own upbringing and my own teachings. I don't know. So Dr. Raj, please explain this.
I think there are two parts of your question. The first part of your question I'll answer with this question. Is khichdi rice or is it dal? And so you see, when you have a path, a synergistic path, it is not as if now I will do asana, now I will do pranayama. You may practice these different, maybe you're in the gym, now I'm doing bench press, now I'm doing bicep curls, now I'm doing deadlift. Perhaps you bring them together because you are training for a triathlon. Perhaps you bring them together for your performance. It is not as if you're using one muscle in isolation. Whether you're a tennis player, whether you are a swimmer, all of the muscles and moves and training come together in order to accomplish a feat. Similarly, all of the limbs will come together in order to accomplish the feat. And the feat here is the raising of consciousness. Okay. In traditional yoga, of course, for asanas and pranayama, the feat is more low-hanging fruit of the alleviation of suffering, of feeling enrichment. It is astounding that no matter where you're starting off and what your beliefs are, you do an asana class with a relatively skilled teacher, and you will feel more calm at the end. How is this even possible? You're feeling more calm at the end of the asana class. Of course, if you're not breathing properly, you won't feel as calm. So the breath work and the postural work, they ultimately synergize. Okay, that is the first part of the question. The second part of the question is pertaining to esoteric reality, not reality that we can experience readily through the senses, but reality that we can corroborate or we can experience with highly evolved inner gaze. There are many, many people who are deluded into thinking that they have an understanding or experience of the chakras, and they most certainly do not. Some of them are even so deluded, they think they can align your chakras this weekend for $300.
Thank you.
Right?
Amazing.
And then there are others who are so deluded, they think the chakras are not real.
Yeah, like me.
There are two kinds of delusion.
Yeah.
There are those who have a visceral experience of the subtle body. There are essentially four kinds of human beings. There are those who are thinking types. All of us are all. There are those who are thinking types first. They need a logical reason for anything to make sense. It's not going to work. There are those who are feeling types, musicians and artists. They don't. They may not care so much about the art history. They want to experience the bhava. There are those who are thinking types. There are those who are feeling types. There are those who are more kinesthetic types. These are the types of people who are very good at assembling furniture, are very good at judging, glancing at someone and knowing their height. They really understand the physical piece. And there are those who are energetic types. Each type relates to a skill with one of the different koshas. Those who are versed in the Annamaya kosha, these are the athletes and the handymen of the world. These are the bridge builders of the world. Those who are very skilled in the Manomaya kosha, these are the artists and the empaths of the world. They feel first and think second. Those who have a very strong Vijnanamaya kosha, they're the critical thinkers of the world, the abstract thinkers of the world. Those who, and relatively few will be in this category, those who primarily function through the Pranamaya kosha, they're what I think of as energetics. There are certain students where they will want to listen to the call, whether I speak about Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutras, or the weather in Toronto, they just want the vibration. They want to pick up the vibration. There are energetics who are more plugged into the energy world. That is much more rare than the kinesthetic types or the thinking types or the feeling types. There are those who have a palpable experience of energy in a space. All of us can learn this. Not all of us have a predisposition towards this kind of intelligence. For those who have more of an energetic awareness, they can feel the energy flowing through the body. They can feel, particularly if there's a coagulation, either in the pit of the stomach or around the chest area or the throat area. Rarely will they feel anything here, typically. And so, yes, the chakras are not concepts. All they are is sort of, they're hubs. They're hubs of processing in the pranamaya kosha that map on. All the koshas, all the layers are not separate. So if you have an epiphany in your Vijnanamaya kosha, you may have a release in your pranamaya kosha. If you have a release in your pranamaya kosha, you may have an epiphany in your Vijnanamaya kosha. They're not separate. You may have a postural issue. You fix the postural issue and your mindset changes as well. We see this in all kinds of endeavors, not just Indic asanas. We see this, if we pay attention, we see this everywhere. Okay. And so there's no need to bastardize Tantra. There's no need to pretend that you know what Kundalini Shakti is. There's no need to pretend the chakras are real or not real. There is no need. It's far beyond the pay grade of most.
Practicing Hatha Yoga and Yoga Asanas, be it of any school, be it Shivananda, be it Ashtanga, or anything, and doing it rightly with the right pranayama could be one way of experiencing Kundalini and all these things. It's possible. It is possible
There are
that
students,
yeah.
there are 100%, there are students. There are those who are quote unquote doing Kundalini Yoga who are highly skilled. The vast majority of them are out of their minds, or they're charlatans or profiteers. Vast majority. Kundalini Yoga. They have no idea what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. They are 5-year-olds talking about sex. They have an experience, but they think they know about sex. But there are people who, whether they're doing Kundalini yoga or some other yoga, they will experience an energetic awakening. Many of my students have had this experience. Many of my students are actually yoga teachers of various lineages. I mean, I'm non-denominational, but and many students will do asanas and have an experience of energy, of Shakti, of Kundalini, and not be quite sure how to make sense of it. Sometimes it wasn't until they came to a class of mine or we had a chat where they could process what was happening with them. So not all teachers have the awareness. Not all teachers are wizards, right? That have that wizardry or that awareness to spot or to sense or to manipulate the movement of energy. But there are those who have discovered that circuitry without trying. So it's definitely there.
Dr. Raj, now we'll move to the second part of the discussion. Equally fascinating, equally brilliant. My first question, your book is the stories behind the poses. First question that I want to ask you, Dr. Raj, why did you write a public book? Because I heard your podcast in which you said this is my first book which is available for the masses at an affordable price point. And I know the body of work that you do, your body of work is vast. So when I got to know about your body of work and everything, I was also surprised that why did you select this topic as your first public book? So I want to understand the genesis of this idea, why the stories behind the poses, and what is the theme of your book? And why did you write the first book as this?
So since 2017, I've been teaching online on Zoom from my home office, unconsciously preparing for the pandemic. When the pandemic came, everybody was, a little confused, but I was just busier than ever before because I was already teaching online at home from my home office on Zoom. I had a Zoom account since 2017, if you can believe it. And so one of the platforms I taught at is a platform I greatly admire. It's set up by another religious studies colleague. His name is Dr. Seth Powell. He's now just recently graduated from Harvard. He nurtured and created this great platform in tandem with his PhD, and it's called Yogic Studies. And somebody said to me, "Do you know Seth? Do you know Seth? I think I've seen it at a conference. You have to connect. You have to connect." I connected with him, and I did not even realize he was doing online education. I was doing online education. He's like, we've been waiting for someone to teach this course. We've had so many requests, and you're obviously the right person, of course, on yoga and Hindu mythology. Can you teach this course for us? I said, sure. So at the end of 2020, November, December, the last course they did was this course on yoga and Hindu mythology. It was fairly successful. I think they had 200 people sign up, which was relatively successful for one of these online courses. And people were interested in understanding the connections between the asanas and the narratives and the stories. And so that's what the course was based on. Now, fast forward a couple of months, 2021, March-ish, I get an email. Hello, we specialize in illustrated books for adults, and we would love a book on this book on the stories behind the poses. And I thought, well, this is interesting. Shall get on a call. How did you know about me? Apparently, one of the yogic studies students, Amparo Rodriguez, I think she's in Spain, if I'm not mistaken, one of her students, she shared the stories with her students. She's a seasoned yoga teacher. And that student has some connection or works for this publishing house. And they came knocking on my door saying, we would love this book. And to my mind, I had in mind, I had done 2 academic books. It's important that I continue publishing because, I am technically an independent scholar. I would welcome a professorship if it ripened, if it was a good fit, of course. I'm not so keen on going to certain places in the world these days, but we'll see what ripens. And so it was important for me to continue publishing. And I actually had wanted to do a book on the Mahabharata that year, still on the back burner. But this felt like an opportunity. It felt like an opportunity. And more importantly, it was an opportunity to serve my students. So it took me a long time to realize all the caps that are worn by this head are always worn on the head of a teacher. Podcasting is teaching. Speaking is teaching. Teaching is teaching. Writing Scholarship is teaching. Yeah. So let me share what I found. Yeah. And so this request from this publisher was indicating a need among students who wanted to learn about this thing. So I thought, okay, well, why not create a resource? I don't really know what's on the market. Many people come to me with this thought leader or this book or this. I said, you have to understand, I'm traditionally trained. I don't consume these things on the market. I don't know what's out there. But I agreed to do the book. I noticed there were, I think, a couple of resources available at the time. I looked at them briefly and I thought, okay, well, let me flesh these out. certainly there were a couple of resources that connected some of these, but I thought, okay, there's a lot that have not been connected, and also more importantly, the connections to sort of the mental, emotional, social reality haven't quite been fleshed out. So let me do this. So I agreed to do this book. I shared my first task was to share 5 stories because the editor of the book wanted to shortlist some illustrators, and she was so brilliant. She didn't just pick an illustrator. What she did, she so loved and resonated with the feel of the stories and the writing. She shared these 5 stories and said, "Okay, now bring them to life." And the one who, in her mind, best brought them to life, in this case, Miss Devika Menon, that's who got the contract to do the illustrations. And not to my credit at all, the illustrations are astounding. I mean, it's a lusciously illustrated book.
They're amazing.
They're mind blowing. They're sort of altering. Yeah, they're so good. I'm so grateful to her. And so the year goes on. You have teaching, you have podcasts, you have some travels, and then comes to the fall, and they say, if you cannot get these in by this deadline, we cannot have this book out for Yoga Day, June 21st, 2022. And I thought, okay. So the majority of this book was written. It just so happens to be the case during Navratri of that year. Just writing and writing and writing, and everything was gotten in on time. And the book came out in June 21st, 2022. I just serendipitously received a statement yesterday morning. In the first 2.5 years, taking us up to last December, I suppose, 2024, the book has reached around 35,000 copies, which is decent for a public book. That's
more than 10,000 is a bestseller. So ideally, statistically, your book is a bestseller.
Okay, I'll take it.
Yeah.
So the book came up from my teaching context, which is meaningful to me. So it's dedicated to my students.
That is brilliant. Now, what is fascinating about your book, Dr. Raj, and we'll go deep into it as well. I'll give an example. Okay. Now, all the physical exercises in the world, you say weight training, calisthenics, Pilates, and all these endurance running, sprinting, you talk about triathlon, cycling, and everything. Very scientific things, and they were originators. They were people who created these exercises for the optimal performance of the human body. And then you had the sports around that. What I found, and I really want the viewers to understand this concept. Yoga in today's time is a global phenomena. Asanas in today's time is global phenomena. What I understood from your book and what I've understood till now from the conversations that we've been having is that there is no one single originator of yoga. And I want this profound thing to go into the heads of people. What this means is kind of like makes yoga asanas like an open source. It is decentralized. They say there is no origin, there is no end, it's just there. It was there, which was understood, which was captured, which was created by many people, which was orally transmitted. And now, if such a thing coming from a very non-Western process, what is a Western process that you said? Everything needs to be quantified, everything needs to be done. But on the contrary, yoga asanas are something which are non-vetted, they are not, as in not from the Western lens, and yet they have taken over the world. What does that mean? That means if something really works, it works and the world will accept. You don't have to have one patriarch, you don't have to have one messiah for something. And that is what is brilliant about yoga asanas. I always used to feel, Dr. Raj, or believe that ye Nath Samprada, the Gorakshnath and I'm forgetting the name, Matsyendranath, Adi Nath Matsyendranath. I thought the Nath Sampradayas are the people who were the originators of yoga asanas. And something that I would never believe in, I also heard that Nagas were the people who created the yoga asanas because there was a civilization of Nagas at the time of Mahabharata. Janmejaya defeated them all. I don't know.
But this infatuation with a singular genesis is it affronts the nature of organic enterprise. Not to say there weren't luminaries such as these nathas, such as Patanjali, of course, they were luminaries, but similar with the Puranas. When you look at the Markandeya Purana, you have the Devi Mahatmya. The Devi Mahatmya was very consciously put there in the Markandeya Purana for a specific reason. But clearly, the Markandeya Purana was composed over various periods of time by various hands. Now, one school of thought would be, oh, let's find the original Markandeya Purana and throw this other stuff away. Well, another school of thought is when you come across a mansion, a glorious estate, a palace, and this wing, Louis the 14th commissioned this wing, and so commissioned this wing, and then this one is like more. What will you do? Well, tear it all down. Where's the original castle? You're missing the bloody point.
Yep.
It's an organic evolution. It's not necessarily an interpolation, because they're intelligently, the wings were intelligently and tastefully added to the estate to thrive in an ecosystem. And this is a very different mode of authorship and even reception than we're used to in the West. And anyone educated with a Western education certainly will share these biases, myself included. I had to overcome these myself as a scholar, right? And so yoga does not have, to our knowledge, a single genesis. What we do have is fascinating and circumstantial sort of snippets that perhaps, these staunch seated asanas are as old as the Indus Valley civilization. We have physical evidence of that.
The seal of Pashupati.
Yeah, and we know that the science of waking up, if you will, is not from the original Vedic hymns. These are from the renouncers, the Indic, yogis or mystics. That the ethos of the Upanishads is very different from the ethos of the Vedic hymns. And so, what were people doing? They were doing presumably waking up practices have been happening in South Asia for millennia. Probably some of those waking up practices obviously involved curating how one sits and perhaps dealing with postures. We don't know. We have certain seminal texts that survive. We have certain seminal figures that we're aware of. But this is a collective enterprise. And to underscore your point, on the most simplistic level, why does everyone, of course, there are people who I love who have Androids and whatever, but why has iPhone taken over the world? Because it works. It suits people's needs. It's enjoyable. It's helpful. If yoga was not helpful, palpably helpful upon one class, it would not have taken over the world. There are other forces. There are marketing forces. There are all kinds of competing pressures. I'm not foolish enough to think simplistically, but I never lose sight of the forest for the trees as well. And if yoga were not offering an important service, product, solution, why on earth would millions of people take it up, even when their own church tells them it's the work of the devil? They're still doing asanas.
Absolutely.
Because they can feel the benefit. So we are looking at, you're looking at a Vedic ritual in the temple, and sure, the scholarly mind is like, gee, I wonder how much of this is the same as the ancient Vedic peoples. Certainly Swaha, certainly the certain mantras, certainly offering to the fire. But when were mudras added to this? When were bija mantras added to this? When, who knows when and who knows why? But we have the recipe. We have the recipe now, and the recipe is nutritious and delicious, so enjoy it. So one question is a question of analysis, right? Intellectualism. The other question is the question of the experiential. And so diving into the stories is diving into the experiential. One is moved by the story of Rama, no matter how old that story is, or we think it is. One is moved by the story of Moses. One is moved by the story of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The power of the story lies in the story. You see, the power of the sambar or the dish, whatever you're eating, lies in that dish. Yes, there is a culinary history. Yes, there's a family sampradaya. Yes, 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 yes. but you don't come back to the restaurant because it's a museum. You come back to the restaurant not to learn about the history of sambar. You come back to the restaurant so you can eat and taste and enjoy and nourish your body. That is why people return to asanas.
Beautiful. Now, the book obviously contains stories of 50 asanas, right? 50 popular asanas that you've taken up. Now, the entire structure of the book is divided broadly into 5 parts. The first segment of the first part is the Shiva, Lord of the Yoga. And in that Shiva, Lord of the Yoga, you have certain poses which are relevant to the Shiv Puran or around the mythology of Shiv and his family and his entire ecosystems, poses which have been linked with that. The second segment of the book is around the Vishnu, the compassionate. This is around the ecosystem of Lord Vishnu, his avatars. Krishna is also there, Ram is also there, and there are certain poses which have been derived from the Puranic tales of Vishnu and his avatars. The third segment is Devi and her manifestations. They are poses which are around the Mother Divine, the Devi and her avatars and her incarnations and other things as well. Then you have one segment on the other gods, in which the Hanuman, my favorite story lies there, the Hanuman one, because that's a very famous thing. And the last segment is on the Rishis, Matsyendranath, Durvasas, lot of Rishis,
Vishamitra, Vasishta.
Vishwamitra, Vashishta. Okay. Now again, Dr. Raj, I'm gonna, though as I told you, I am a Devi, I follow the Devi ecosystems. That means I believe in such things. But still, the rational mind in me is very prevalent and it's very strong. And it's because of Sri Aurobindo. It's his problem. It has come from there. Now, I want to know how my mind is working. Now, in all of these stories, the names of the poses were never explicitly mentioned. How were the poses derived? Were they indirectly inspired? And if they were indirectly inspired by these stories of various deities, who were the people who then converted those stories by getting inspired into these forms? Is what I want to understand. How did that happen from the Puranas to the yoga poses that we know today? How did the transition happen? The inspiration is clearly there. I understand that. And how also are the poses divided into various gods as well, is what I want to understand.
Imagine in an alternate universe, physical asanas were devised in an Abrahamic context, right? Abrahamic means the traditions resulting from Abraham's covenant with Yahweh, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, right? And so imagine that some great kinesiologists or sages came up with some interesting, powerful, effective postures. But these postures were not just physical postures. These postures were mental postures. They were psychic postures. They were not just movement of matter, but they were aimed at the movement of consciousness. How do we impact consciousness? Have you heard some beautiful, exalted music? Have you heard an enchanting tale? What if there was one posture and there's a wall next to me, so I can't do this posture, but imagine someone's arms outstretched both ways, and it was called Moses Asana. Arms outstretched, Moses Asana. Why is it named after Moses? Well, most will know. Oh, is a pivotal moment in the career of Moses where it's a triumphant channeling of the power of God on high to part the Red Sea. And knowing the story will inform one not just of the physical posture, but the mental posture, the psychic posture, the inner posture that is achieved by this asana, because we are more than the body. The story gives insight into the inner posture. Now, imagine a very similar posture was created in this alternate universe of Abrahamic asanas. And this posture was called crucifix asana. Anyone in the Christian world and beyond the Christian world would understand the crucifix and the dying of Jesus on the cross, crucified by the Romans. Do we not think that although outstretched arms are there for Moses and outstretched arms are there for Jesus, do we not think the mind, the mood, the mode, the mentality would be fundamentally different between one versus the other, although there is a similar motion of the body? Similar motion of the body. What does this mean? Well, this is Abhaya Mudra. Fear not. What does this mean? If you're in traffic, this means stop. Fear me. Stop. Otherwise, you're going to jail. Say it's a police officer replacing a, you know, what does this mean? The same posture, what does it mean? So, the brilliant people who designed the asanas, whether they did so, I'm being facetious, okay?
Yeah.
Whether they did so in the Indus Valley civilization or they did so last Wednesday afternoon, as some might have, or somewhere in between there, somewhere between 5,000 years ago and 5 days ago, who knows where, whenever the posture was designed, why is it that it doesn't have a different name everywhere? That Virabhadrasana is Virabhadrasana. That Durvasasana is Durvasasana.
Yeah. Yeah.
First of all, why on earth would this posture be named after a sage? These very difficult postures, they're all named after sages. The obvious intellectual question is why? What is it about that sage that makes this posture his namesake? Obviously, I don't mean to belittle anybody. It may not be obvious as someone doing postures, but postures named after the sage. Durvasa is an irascible, temperamental, anger management sage who was an amsha of the wrath of Shiva. Shiva was fighting with Parvati, and Parvati was like, I can't take your bullshit anymore. You need to get some anger management courses. He's like, I'm so sorry, I'll go away. He took some anger management courses online and then took a fraction of his wrath and threw it somewhere. And then it sort of impregnated someone, and behold, Durvasa was born. This posture is a very, very difficult posture. You do this for a while, you will be cranky. You will be looking to throw curses if you do this for a long time. It's named after this person who, even when he's sitting still, he's in this posture because he's so agitated. He's always ready to throw a curse. Someone didn't acknowledge me, then this and that. He's just so agitated as a person. Perhaps, then, not perhaps, obviously, there's a significance there. So if they're named after sages, there's something in the biography of the sage, similar to Moses Asana or Crucifix Asana. There's something in the biography of the sage that is going to be the aha moment of what the posture is arriving at, the state of consciousness, because the postures were designed to curate consciousness. Yes, to have physical relief and effects and benefits to the body, but not under the delusion or fallacy that the physical body is the only body or even the most important body, or that healing begins and ends in the physical body. Sometimes it does. You get a cut, you need some disinfectant, you need a Band-Aid. Yes, this is something that's coming to you from the outside. You come up with depression. Maybe there are external causes, maybe there aren't. You are suicidal. Would we find a Band-Aid or a bandage or a stent for someone who's suicidal? Mental illness is so difficult to deal with because it's much more than brain chemistry. Of course, there's a brain chemistry component. The answer is not just one or the other. Of course, the Annamaya Kosha is real. And of course, we have powerfully mapped much of the Annamaya Kosha. But what is mysterious to us is the more subtle aspects of self that we will never physically map. And so if a posture is named after a sage, there's something about that sage that's relevant to that posture. Now, we see postures that aren't even just named after sages. They're named after mythic motifs like Anantasana, Vishnu's sprawling serpent couch between the ages. What on earth does that mean? Well, understanding the function of Vishnu's couch and that experience will facilitate in the understanding of the experience that the posture is aiming to facilitate. Now, you mentioned a great example. One of the best examples is warrior. I'm
Pose.
doing warrior today, bro. Good
Yeah.
for you. Congratulations. I'm so glad. We have a bros only yoga studio. We just do warrior and shavasana. None of that downward dog nonsense. Okay, great. Good for you. Good. Thank you, sir. Do you know why? Do you know why it's called warrior? Because it was named after some arrogant asshole who couldn't get enough of himself. Like, do you know why it was named after warrior? It's not warrior. It is warrior, yes. It's not just warrior. It's Veera Bhadrasana. Veera Bhadra is not any warrior. There are no shortage of warriors among the avatars of Vishnu, the manifestations of the mother, or Shiva and his iterations. This is a very specific warrior on a very specific mission that is born of Shiva's incredible loss and anger and rage because the love of his life has burnt herself alive because his father-in-law is a blithering idiot buffoon morally whose ego knows no bounds. And so it is an intense a manifestation of intensity in the face of egoistic adversity. This is warrior. It's not intensity of your own ego. It's intensity in the face of egoic ignorance that would destroy you. And why are there three warrior poses? The three warrior poses pertain to three pivotal moments, mythic moments in the story of Veerabhadra. Warrior one, he's receiving his instructions from on high. You have to look before you leap. And if you're lucky, you're not just going to look outwardly, you look inwardly. You have to not just see, but be a seer at times. You have to not just be a rebel without a cause. You want to be a rebel, at least have a cause. You're on a mission that's great, but it's just a mission for your own personal aggrandizement? Or is it a mission for something greater? What is your purpose? What is your dharma? What is your mandate from heaven, so to speak? So warrior one is connecting with that prana from above. Prana, energy, whatever you want to call it. Where Veerabhadra is receiving his marching orders from Shankara, from Shiva. Warrior two is okay. I've got my marching orders. I'm in Rajas. Raghav is very, very familiar with Rajas because he has a Pitta Vata constitution. So he's always doing something. So he understands this warrior. So I'm going to go forth and I'm not going to miss my mark. And warrior three is that moment where he cracks the coconut, he does the deed, he decapitates Daksha, his mission is complete. Now, whether you keep the story in your mind while you're doing the asana, whether you look at the story beforehand and it's in your subconscious, there is no way on earth that knowing the namesake of the asana will not deepen the asana for you. It's impossible. It's impossible to know the story and not get more out of the asana.
Absolutely. No, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I have no idea if I've answered your question.
No, you have. And you have no, you have beautifully. And Dr. Raj, whilst you were answering the question, a kind of a theory came in my mind. I just want to have an open discussion around that, which is in this ecosystem only. Now, I see a process. Now. These yoga poses were created or generated with some reference point. Reference point in this case being the Puranic stories, and taken the characteristics of that character, of taken the situation and everything they were created. So I see a process. Now my mind is saying, Raghav, that means any new poses in the future could also be created with respect to any reference point. This makes yoga asanas as an ecosystem ever evolving. That means if there is a process that we have identified of referencing something, of understanding what happened in that time, understanding the emotion of that individual and entity, and creating a pose that symbolizes what happened, that means this process could be applied everywhere and anywhere with any reference point, historical, past, present, future, whatever, and new poses could be created.
Well, I think there are a number of points there. One point is one important phenomenon is that the only way a tradition survives just like species, is to adapt and evolve.
Yeah.
Traditions which do not evolve and adapt, they do not survive. They die out. They go the way of the dodo, right? So, without question, the various aspects of Indic tradition are being adapted. The story of Rama. How many incredible iterations, reiterations, retellings, dramatizations, adaptations of the story of Rama, whether we're looking at the Valmiki Ramayana or we're looking at Sita Sings the Blues, right? How many adaptations have there been? And there's going to be a line, and this line will be different depending on who you are. There'll be a line where, oh, that's not tradition, you've bastardized it.
Yes.
Or you've adapted it, and this is what's going to allow this to survive. Right. So when I read the Devi Mahatmya, I see this extraordinary coded knowledge on the mechanics of power.
Mechanics
And
of?
when I see power, power, Shakti. And so when I see, a buffalo demon has stolen the throne of Indra and all the gods come together, and from their rage that comes out of them, from their collective outrage, the goddess is formed. I don't see this as different from George Floyd or any moment of collective outrage where Shakti manifests more than the sum of their parts in
Beautiful.
order to quell whoever's in charge. Now, there are those who would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. This is not talking about the Devi Mahatmya. But the power of mythological stories is the power to speak to this most slow burning, potentially timeless aspects of the human experience. And that's why they have an appeal across culture and over time, because they're speaking about aspects of our experience that don't change. Sure, the idiot on the throne may change and the throne may change, but the abuse of power will not change. There will always be Homo sapiens who will abuse power. This will always be. We need to be checked somehow. And so yes, so tradition evolves by being adapted. Some would even see this book as an adaptation to tradition. There are myths that are obvious because, to this mind anyhow, because Durvasasana. Obviously, you learn something about Durvasas, you'll learn about this asana. There are namesakes. Some of them are more generic, like Kurmasana, a tortoise. Which tortoise? Well, I tell the story of Vishnu's Kurma Avatara when Vishnu came down as a tortoise. There are some like Vrikshasana. It could be a number of stories that will illumine the power of a tree and the power of that poise, groundedness, and reaching of the tree in tree pose or Vrikshasana. There are some that are obvious namesakes. There are some, and there are some where there's creative liberty in terms of what you may wish to do. I take the liberties, I think, in the Devi chapter in the middle of the book. In the chapter 3 is 10 stories on manifestations of the feminine divine. For example, for Hamsasana, swan pose, Saraswati. For Padmasana, lotus pose, Lakshmi. Obvious. But what I do is I retell the entire Devi Mahatmya in the last 5 chapters, 5 stories of chapter 3. And so in ways that will be an adaptation. Now, the question that would arise in terms of the postures themselves is that, are they doing the job? Is this a complete set of postures to wring out all sorts of emotional experiences? Is there a need for postures that has been overlooked? The first question is there a need? If so, introducing new postures, yes, I think it makes perfect sense to continue in the vein of drawing from archetypal narratives that relate to the experience of that physical posture.
Now, Dr. Raj, I want to tell you something. So when we do podcasts like this, now, there is a section wherein we ask the author to do some 2 to 3 minute reading from their book. I would like you to read one story from the book, the Hanuman story from the other god section of Surya Namaskar.
So this story is from chapter 4. Chapter 4 is a chapter of miscellaneous deities. It's called the power of the gods. Perhaps if I redid this, I would say the powers of the gods, because they have unique powers. And the first story in chapter 4 is called Salutations to the Sun. It is a story of Hanuman. So Hanuman was indeed a very special monkey, conceived by means of a special blessing from Lord Shiva himself. His mother, Anjana, and his father, Kesari, were childless for some time. And of course, all of you will know they're Vanaras. They're part of the monkey clan, yeah? And before they were childless for some time, so Anjana undertakes great penance to Shiva, Shankar Bhagwan, Nilakanta, the great blue-throated lord, day in and day out. She's praying to Shiva. And Shiva sees that her heart is sincere and wishes to bless her, not just in an ordinary way because her bhakti is extraordinary. The blessing should be extraordinary. So Shiva's own seed is carried by Vayu, the wind god, to impregnate Anjana. And she conceives the great monkey hero Hanuman. From a very young age, he shows staggering feats of strength. As a young child, he can lift his parents up, and his spectacular strength only grew as he did. One morning, the young Hanuman was hungry, and his mother Anjana was out in the market buying mangoes, because she knew that mangoes were her boy's favorite fruit of all to eat. So the young Hanuman looks out his window into the morning sun and sees this giant, luscious, delicious, golden, orange, reddish mango on the horizon. He mistakes the sun for a mango. So he pushes off with his feet and he aims to reach the sun. Before he knows it, he's airborne and Hanuman is traveling through the air. He finally gets to Indra Loka. He finally gets to the heavenly realm. And Indra, the king of gods, says to him, "This is no mango, child. This is Surya himself, bringer of day. You cannot go any further lest you perish by his flames." With this, the disappointed Hanuman returned to earth. By this time, Anjana returned from the market with a fresh basket of mangoes to sate her son's hunger. Although Hanuman ate his fill, he still thirsted. He hungered for knowledge about the sun, who he had come so close to meeting. So close, but not quite. So as he grows, he proves himself not only physically powerfully, but morally powerfully, spiritually powerful. He has remarkable self-control, contentment, containment, and he has a penchant for serving. He loves to serve. Monkeys are obviously curious, as we well know from Curious George, but this monkey was curious about, the mysteries of life, philosophy. So he turned and sought out sages at every turn whom he could learn from until there was no one left to learn from. So he decided to set out to see the sun, to seek the knowledge of the sun. So he sets out soaring through the heavens. Hanuman steers himself towards Surya the sun. He soon drew near to the maker of day. He followed it majestic intensely. Behold, Surya the sun god was riding his chariot drawn by 7 celestial horses. Hanuman approaches him and asks him for Diksha. Guru Diksha Pradehi me. Please give me instruction, initiate me into knowledge, Gurudev. And so Surya refuses. He scoffs. The sun is Krura. It can be harsh. The midday sun in Rajasthan it can be quite harsh at times. So he refuses. Says, "Look, listen, monkey. Yes, I can see your Swabhava. You've got great qualities, but I'm busy. Look, when can I stop to teach you? At what point do I stop doing my duty? Never has there been a point since the creation of the universe when I haven't done my duty, and never will that time come. They'll be able to chart my course for thousands of years in the future, and they'll know exactly where I'll be because I am the essence of dependability." The clever monkey came up with a solution. "Glorious Surya, what if I keep pace with you? If I keep up with you, will you teach me then? Will you accept me as a student then?" Surya still scoffed and said to Hanuman, "You can try if you'd like, but the longer you keep pace, the more exposure you'll have to my fiery presence. You'll be singed in no time, monkey." Hanuman responded, "If you'll have me as a student, I'll keep pace for as long as I can. Even a day of your diksha, even a day of your instruction is worth a lifetime without it." Surya agreed to instruct Hanuman. Hanuman positioned himself to face the sun and flew backwards so that as in the ways of old, student and teacher could face each other, parampara, from one to the other, because that is how lineage is preserved and propagated in this world. Parampara, from one to the other. Surya's instructions began. Surya taught Hanuman about Vedic knowledge and about all the mysteries of life, all the esoteric knowledge. After all, the sun sees all. He outlives all. He supports all. He is the great bringer of illumination, possessing his own luster. The sun sees through all shadows and can separate the wheat from the chaff. Hanuman learnt a great deal, keeping pace with Surya day after day after day, then a week, then week after week after week, then a month, then month after month after month, then a season and 2 and 3 and 4 seasons. Surya was impressed by the monkey's forbearance, his intelligence, his respect, and he marched on with his teachings for exactly 1 year. One cycle of Surya, 1 year. When they were done, the wise and blackened Hanuman offered his prostrations to Surya the sun, his guru. As was the days of old, as it was in the days of old, at the end of their training, Surya asked Hanuman for a dakshina, a ritual fee, but he didn't have anything specific in mind. He knew the monkey was wise, and what does the sun need? The sun depends on nothing. The sun is entirely, self-contained. So he says, please give me the dakshina of your choosing. Whatever you offer, I will accept contentedly. You are considerate and wise. Hanuman replied, having learned from you the mysteries of being, I wish not only to honor you as my guru for the rest of my days, but I want for all the world to honor you too. I know you are worshipped around the world. I've seen the world by your side, by the Egyptians and Greeks and Persians, and certainly in India too. I know that the whole world honors you and worships you with prayers and hymns and salutations. But I wish to devise a very specific sequence of postures dedicated to your glorification, dedicated to the activation of your solar energy in the embodied beings of Earth. The very first of these postures, Guru San, will be Pranamasana, the position I now adopt as I pay my respects to you, my Guru. Surya was pleased at this great gift made in exchange for his year-long instruction. He blessed Hanuman with success with his solar yoga sequence, known to us now as Surya Namaskara. After each tale, there's a teeny bit of a spiritual gloss, paragraph or so at the end, that reads as follows. Pranamasana is the very first step of Surya Namaskara. It requires one to be centered, focused, and reverent, whomever and whatever form our guru takes. Whether an enlightened being or a barista or an Uber driver or a podcast host, whoever is driving us, who knows? Whomever and whatever form our guru takes, we are called to respect them if we are to succeed in receiving all that they have to give. This posture naturally brings our attention to the heart center, so crucial for the mutual devotion flowing between student and teacher, parampara. The Surya Namaskara sequence also calls us to lower our heads, subdue our egos, so that there is space to receive the grace our Guru will give. Surya Namaskara is far more than only a heating practice geared toward the cultivation of solar channel. It is a sequence that brings into balance both channels when done well. The sun is the light of awareness, representative of the light of the soul. Swaha.
Beautiful, amazing, brilliant. And now the viewers know the kind of stories. And I mean, when I read I decided, Dr. Raj, I have been trying to do yoga now. I mean, on and off. I have decided from tomorrow onwards, I'll do just Surya Namaskar. Because now there's a connect. Because now you know where this is coming from. Now you know the genesis. And imagine all the Hanuman Bhakts out there. None of them, majority don't even know there's a relationship between Surya Namaskar and Lord Hanumana. What if they come to know about this thing? One more thing would get added into their bhakti. And that is so powerful and profound. And that I wish where people read this story, they purchase a book, they read all the stories. The stories which are related to Devi were amazing. I had no idea that Balasana came from Krishna's, when Yashoda came to him and she asked him to open his mouth to see the cosmos, and the Vishnu's like, amazing. It is just simply superb, Dr. Raj, what you've done with the book. Is there something next that you're writing? What is next in your agenda? What are you writing next?
That's a good question. As I mentioned, I'm an independent scholar, and so much of my time is taken up with teaching and podcasts and one-on-one life guidance work. So writing always takes the back burner, but there is a brand new translation of the Devi Mahatmya that's been on my desk for 2 years. I need to just iron out some of the grammatical issues and write the introduction and get that off. So that's been on my desk. But there's also a really meaningful article that will belong to a collected volume on the Devi Mahatmya that's being published next year. And this article is comparing the god of Genesis, the masculine deity of Genesis, with the Devi of the Devi Mahatmya, and showing the difference between masculine power and feminine power. So that's what I'm working on now.
Oh, this is no. I've. What is the first thing that you said? The masculine
The
what?
god, the god of Genesis, Yahweh, the deity of Genesis and Exodus, the deity that we see in the Abrahamic masculine
Oh,
deity, God. So comparing masculine god of the West
huh.
with the feminine goddess of India and showing the difference in masculine power versus feminine power.
Then what is the difference between this masculine power of the West and the masculine power of Shiva?
Well, it's complicated. I think one of the differences that in the West they take one personality and say the personality is absolute.
The physical
In
form you're
him,
saying. The physical form you're
the,
saying.
the personality. So
Acha, acha.
Yahweh and his quirks, his whims, that he is the face of the absolute. Some people may say that about Shiva or Vishnu, but there is a sense that there are many manifestations of the divine.
Yeah.
There's a plurality, and beyond that, perhaps to many, there is a divine that we can't know, Brahman, Purusha, Nirguna Brahman, however we think of it, that there is one divine principle that can manifest even in other religions. That's an extraordinarily different idea than there's one deity, one revelation. No one else has any access to God. So they're very different. So basically, I'm doing this comparison now, and I'm also working on this, finishing this brand new translation of the glories of the goddess.
Dr. Raj, how did you get into the Devi Mahatmya? And I also want to understand a little bit how you got initiated. In which school did you get initiated? Something about your guru. I really want to understand Devi Mahatmya from your perspective, the entire Shaktism from your perspective. That is something which I resonate to. That is something very close to my heart. So I want to know, how did your journey start in this vertical? Who were your gurus? How did you get initiated? What happened? Is there certain experiences that you think you can share? And talk a little bit about the Shakti ecosystem as well. It's very important for, I want people to know the Shakti ecosystem.
Yeah, so I did a PhD thesis at the University of Calgary from the years of 2011 to 2015.
Hmm.
And I was a scholar of narrative. So my master's was on the Valmiki Ramayana. So I really enjoy Sanskrit stories, essentially, right? Itihasa Purana, you can say. And at the time when I was doing my master's, it was interesting. I did my PhD pretty quickly in 3.5 years, 4 years technically on paper, which is fairly quick.
Yeah.
PhDs in the humanities are typically about 6 years or so. But I did my master's rather slowly. I did it over 3 years, half time. And it was like the master's and the master, because I was studying with Mantriji, my guru, heavily in all of the years of my master's training. I was working a fair bit, working to support myself and myself through school, doing this master's at the University of Toronto half time, and then studying with Mantriji day in and day out, yoga, philosophy. Those days it was moksha, moksha, moksha. We were doing moksha teachings, right? But in addition to the spirituality of waking up, he had initiated many of us into the Chandipata, which is the ritual recitation of the Devi Mahatmya. So the Devi Mahatmya is fascinating because it is a mythological text couched in the Markandeya Purana, which tells the tales of the glories of the goddess. But it moonlights, so to speak, as a liturgical text that's incanted in ritual, as liturgy. And typically during the fall Navaratri, there is a 3 to 4 hour ritual where the entire Devi Mahatmya is offered into the fire after each verse Swaha. There are various hymns before and after, and it's called the Chandipata, right? So not only is the text describing the glories of the goddess on an intellectual or a mental level, but the text is understood as a means of energetically availing the Shakti of the goddess on an experiential level. So it's a beautiful text to serve as the cornerstone of, say, retreats and teaching, because we can speak about it intellectually, we can storytell from the text, and then we could chant verses. For example, the famous Ya Devi hymn
Sarvabhuteshu. Yeah.
that's in chapter five,
Yeah.
of the Devi Mahatmya. There are four hymns in the Devi Mahatmya. So I was doing a lot of, my guru is not a sort of a household name or a name brand guru. He's a very powerful, comes from a very powerful esoteric lineage. And so it's not as if you will Google us and find any of us online. Some of his students, one in particular, is studied a great deal of astrology. And one of his astrology students of many decades has many students who you'll see his name, KL Mantri, or Mantriji, we called him, as their Paramaguru for their Jyotisha. They feel the need to signal that, I suppose, to Westerners who may wish to know what lineage you're from. But other than that one student, probably his greatest astrological disciple, and his now many students in the West, you won't see anything written about him. You won't see. He's sort of he was a cave dweller who happened to live in Toronto, essentially. But very powerful, very wise being, and I had the extraordinary, honor and privilege of studying with him day in and day out. I learned various shastras. I learned all kinds of things from him, and more than fishing for me, Mandariji taught me how to fish, and so and so in addition to initiating me into the Chandipata, into various Devi practices, I received the blessing of being able to study the Devi Mahatmya. And it never occurred to me. It's like, if I'm a psychology student, would I do a psychoanalysis of my own mother? It felt like, oh, well, this is the ritual practitioner sphere. But it was fascinating because it's a rich text as an object of study. There's so much that needs to be done on this text as an object of study, because we don't know who authored the Devi Mahatmya. What we know is we have this phenomenal text that is revolutionary, because never before in Vedic thought or Indic thought do we see a great goddess. We see goddesses like Vak, like Saraswati, like Lakshmi. We don't see a mother goddess until this relatively late text. So it's a fascinating text, but it's a text that I relate to both. I think three main ways I relate to it is as a scholar, thinking of it intellectually, as a storyteller, bringing to life its stories, and as an upasaka or a sadhaka or a spiritualist or a wizard, shall we say, engaging the text as a catalyst for the cultivation of Shakti.
Dr. Raj, when you said that a great deal of study needs to be done on this as well. Now, this sentence and these selected words, I love it. When somebody says a great deal of study needs to be done on these scriptures or these ancient Indian verticals, that fascinates me. In all the Indian scriptures that you've read, including the Devi Mahatmya, including Ramayana, Valmiki, I don't know, Vedas, Puranas, what all, do you somewhere see hints of a higher level of technology that we are seeing now manifest by the scientists?
To my mind, the experiential and the empirical, although they cross-pollinate, they are different orders of reality. So the ways in which one receives intuitive insight is not the way in which one receives sensory input.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so, in terms of advanced physical technology a la ancient aliens, no, I think that's ludicrous. I think that's pseudoscience. But I think the fallacy is thinking that the scientific method is, we need to adhere to the scientific method when dealing with the physical universe so we can separate the wheat from the chaff. Obviously, this safeguards us from fanaticism and dogma and superstition 10,000%. Having said that, the great fallacy we make is thinking that the scientific method can be the arbiter of all truth, and it most certainly cannot.
Oh, that's a very powerful statement. Yeah.
Because the scientific method is the arbiter of empirical, measurable, physical truth.
And it has its limits. Is what you're saying. It has its limits.
It's limited to the empirical, measurable, physical reality. Just because we cannot physically measure the spiritual does not mean the spiritual does not exist. So I think there are people who take the method and the domain of one and trespass upon the other. There are those who are spiritual and project their spiritual musings onto reality, physical reality, and they do pseudoscience.
Yes.
Okay. There are those who are scientific and they're reductionistic and will be like, there's no way that psychic reading was real. She must have known that stuff beforehand. And they're actually, ironically, they're close-minded to data of a sort of an otherworldly nature. There are people who will have profound experiences. They'll go to a Navi Jyotishi where some guy's reading details about your life written on a leaf. It's completely mind-bending. And this was happening well before Google. And we cannot account for that scientifically. So I would say that scientific inquiry needs to be done responsibly and well, but need not trespass upon spiritual experience. And similarly, spiritual experience needs to be engaged on its own terms and need not trespass upon scientific inquiry.
But I have heard many a times on many occasions by a lot of people saying that spirituality and science needs to go hand in hand. I never understood what that means then.
It never will. They never will. That's ludicrous. That's like saying fish and birds need to play together. They're different domains. Yes, of course, there are fish who go above into the air. Yes, of course, there are birds who go down into the water. Of course. But the physical domain, causation as we see it, empiricism, the scientific method, this is crucial. This is absolutely crucial. Right? We without it, we have fanaticism, dogma, and just really poor understanding of reality. So what does the science say about COVID? Not what does your ideology say about COVID? What is the science tell us about the vaccination? The problem is that people are not moved by facts. People are moved by narrative. They're moved by story. So the stories that are told about physical reality, that's what moves people to believe what they believe, right? So we have to understand the difference between empiricism and the outer world and the inner world. Science is the domain of the outer world. Spirituality is the domain of the inner world. There is a threshold, there is a horizon where heaven and earth meet, but they never truly meet. So the idea that spirituality needs to be scientific is a pseudoscientific idea itself. It's also predicated upon the fallacy that empiricism can be the arbiter of reality and that all reality is physical. That's a fallacy. And that fallacy is self-evident for anyone who pays attention to their own being. But it may not be evident to the vast majority of muggles who gawk outwardly and never look within.
And if people are of this opinion that we invite scientific inquiry into some of our spiritual texts and some of the spiritual realizations, because in today's time, there are people who are trying to prove the existence of consciousness. There are people who are scientifically trying to understand consciousness, grow consciousness. Then, Dr. Raj, is consciousness a realm of spirituality that science should not even touch upon and should not even try to understand? Or is it a neutral thing that can be approached from any angle?
Consciousness is not a subject of awareness. Consciousness is the principle of awareness. So they're dogs chasing their own tails, trying to take the principle of awareness as a subject of awareness, an object of awareness. It's not understanding what consciousness is. Consciousness is the thing whereby we understand everything else.
Yeah.
And maybe in a couple 100 years, the West may take seriously what the ancients were saying about consciousness because it's self-evident.
And it is all experiential then it is experiential. It is completely experiential, something that cannot be quantified by the ways of the...
We cannot even define consciousness without invoking subjectivity and experientialism.
Yes, you're right.
It is the essence of subjectivity and experientialism. It is that by which all experiences are experienced. So they're dogs chasing their own
Own
tails,
tail.
trying to look for a transmaterial principle or field in the material world. It will not happen.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. A lot of people are actually trying to prove the existence of consciousness. They are trying to create their own theories. There are books written by people who are trying to prove, and some of them are good. I find them good. There is this Professor Anil Seth. I got to know about him through Naval Ravikant's podcast. I've been trying to understand. But you're right. They're trying to chase their own tail.
You
It's
can
very big.
understand, you can understand when someone has an ayahuasca experience and some being tells them something about themselves, their mother, their life, their job, and provides transrational knowledge to them. Of course, you can measure their brain waves all you want, but their brain waves is not tantamount to their experience. Their brain waves is the residue of their
Oh
experience.
wow. So your object of reference is not even the highest form of
It's
reference. It is the residue.
the fallacy of starting off and assuming that existence is only material, or even forget existence, that you are only material. It is a colossal and naive and juvenile fallacy. Now, science is wondrous. Our civilization has mapped the material like no one else in the history of
Yeah.
Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
It is glorious, but we are so blinded by how well we've done that. We cannot pull ourselves away out of hubris and understand that we are only mapping one side of the curtain. We think we can see the whole curtain from this one side. We can't. And don't believe a word anybody else says. Go sit every day for a year and do this mantra and come and ask me the same question in a year if you have it. Don't believe anything anyone says. Look into your own being.
Beautiful. Wow. I never saw it from this perspective. I thought science could have the answer to everything. You have
That's
explained
what
very
science wants
logical.
you to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
That
we
is
are.
an
Yeah.
science is a methodology. People have taken it as an ideology. It's not an ideology. It's a methodology. People take it as an ideology. They feel science will save them. Science has become the religion. Science will save me. Science will save you on a certain level, yes, but science is not a religion. It's not an ideology. It's a methodology for discerning the truth about the empirical world. It is a colossal fallacy to assume that all you are is evolved sperm. This is a colossal fallacy that all you are is a bag of flesh. It's a colossal fallacy.
Dr. Raj, I now want to just talk a little bit about Indian Wisdom School. What is the Indian
Okay.
Wisdom School? Why did you start the Indian Wisdom School? What is the aim of the Indian Wisdom School? And I would also want you to mention some of the courses and some of the things that you have in the Indian Wisdom School. We'll also put the link of the Indian Wisdom School in the bio of the podcast. Please tell us about the genesis of the Indian Wisdom School, your vision with it, and what you have right now.
Sure. In 2021, I founded the Indian Wisdom School because there was nowhere that I can teach, just, get the real Raj, so to speak, Dr. Raj uncensored. I very much appreciate academic teaching and continuing studies teaching. And when I teach at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, I teach from an academic perspective. It's very open to practitioners, but it's from a historical, philosophical perspective, similar to yogic studies. But at the Indian Wisdom School, if somebody wants to learn about Shakti, if they want to learn about koshas, if they want to learn about the esoteric, that's where I can teach that. It's hybrid spiritual scholarly. It's hybrid, where I can share wisdom teachings and for spiritual awakening and evolution, but not divorced from reality, right?
Absolutely.
So it's difficult. It's difficult for people to find both, and very few people are very smart or very spiritual. And the Indian Wisdom School typically is for people who are both, people who are very spiritual and very smart. They want to understand experientially and understand intellectually, and
Yeah.
then they're satisfied.
Yeah. So that is, and what are the courses that you have till now in the Indian Wisdom School?
There are about, I think, 30-ish courses.
And this
There's a
yoga is also
series.
a course. This the secret.
There's the stories behind the poses. There is an official companion course at the school, and there is a series where there's a deep dive. Everything I share in the book, I go even deeper in the courses. each chapter has a course. The Shiva chapter has a course, Shiva stories. The Vishnu chapter has a course, Vishnu stories. The Devi chapter has a course. There's a companion course. So if you go to indianwisdomschool.com and you look at the courses, there's a story stream. There is a Shakti stream where we do all the goddess courses, like that. There are different streams. So there's a yoga stream where we look at various yoga courses. So there's a lot there for people in terms of their interests. And this just came up organically. I think at this point we're somewhere like 26 courses created, something like that.
Dr. Raj, it has been amazing. You are
Uh,
remarkable. You are remarkable, and I'm honored and I'm very lucky that in this auspicious time, we got connected. You humbly accepted. Thank you. You are amazing.